Khamit family, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate this. We love you and want you to come back.
Thank you so much.
Let's bring them on with a hostep, black clap.
All right.
My sister Nia, I thank you so much. To my brother Bay, I thank you for inviting me here. And to all of us here, I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. The idea that we're coming with is our children in particular, but our people, have to become conscious of who we are as a people and what we've done and what we've achieved.
Right.
And we have developed a think tank, as we said earlier, coming out of the work of Dr. Amos Wilson. Because he said what we need is a think tank. And by that I mean this. I mean that we have worked with many, I'm sure you have it here, but homeschoolers. Parents that have had enough of the system and want to take the education of their children and their family into their own hands. And so they're homeschooling. And so we've assisted many of our community members in developing a way in which you can begin the process of educating our children, how to set up your day, how to put things in place. We also have worked with community centers, any place that calls us, so that the Per Ankh, as I've often said, is not a school. It's a traveling school. And that was a work that we, through Dr. Amos Wilson, through Professor Clark, and all the other scholars, I can go through the name, our good brother Dr. Asa Hilliard and others, we began to listen to, we began to watch, we began to study, and what we came to realize is that we already have schools, and what I think we need to do, this is coming from our own perspective, is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If we spent our time looking to build buildings in order to build schools, that would take up all our time. Yet there are those of us who already have schools. We have workshop series. We have churches that have schools. We have a number of different entities that have the capacity, have the building, have everything in place, so that our idea was not to create a school, but to create a traveling think tank. Think tank meaning a Per Ankh. A per in the Kemetic language means house or temple. Ankh means life. Our ancestors called the places of knowing and of knowledge and of wisdom of the Tehuti. The knowledge, the patron was Tehuti, the ibis bird, whose mate was Ma'at, who was justice and reciprocity and balance. And so what we've attempted to do is to create a think tank, and what we're doing right here is part of this process. To come to to our family here in Washington, D.C., and to develop a concept as to how we can start this process. Between today and tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about how this is going to happen, but first, I'd like to demonstrate certain things as to who we are as a people and what we have achieved. And when I spoke to Brother Bay and Sister Nia, there were two topics that they wanted me to look at. One of them was the origins of life coming out of Africa, which is key. But what's also very interesting is that, just like Dr. Clark taught us, before you can even get into something like that, before you can even start talking about something like that, there are other things that you have to talk about. And one of the things that you have to talk about is, where do you start? Where does this curriculum start? We know it's not going to start in enslavement. That was our battle. So that's not even a discussion. But do you begin with the great kingdoms of West Africa? Do you begin with the pyramids? Do you begin with the origin of life in Africa? Where do you begin? Well, you got to begin before the beginning began. You have to go all the way back to understand certain things. And one of the things that I'd like to share with you is how our ancestors saw things happen. Our ancestors had written something that they called the Shabaka stone. The Shabaka stone resides in the British Museum. It is a stone. This is the photograph of it. I had a photograph, please, if you can send that around. This is what you're looking at there. This is a stone that is approximately 1.12 yards by 1.6 yards, or 3.4 feet by 4.8 feet. Something look like that. We also know that this was broken off. That in fact, this is not even half the size of what the actual stelae or stone look like. So there's a lot that's been written that's not on this, that we do not have possession of. But so much is revealed in this that it shows very important information. The stone itself, which we'll talk about as time goes on, has 2 horizontal lines that go across. It has 62 lines that are vertical. In Meduneter, as we call the language, Greeks call it hieroglyphs, we call it Meduneta. We know that you read Meduneter in the direction that the faces are looking. So that it is obvious that when I show you another piece of this, that the faces are facing in that direction, which would basically be to the right of the stone. So you read from left to right in the direction of the faces looking at you. If the faces were facing the other way, whether it be birds or whether it be animals, whether it be humans, you read in the direction into the face. Almost like you are speaking to the person or the entities that are speaking to you. That's how heavy our ancestors were. And you always read it that way. There were never exceptions. They never had some faces looking this way and other faces looking that way. They never wrote that way, because then you could never read the document. Vertical, you always read from top to bottom. So in Meduneter, you could either read from left to right or from right to left. But when it was vertical, you always read from top to bottom, never from bottom to top. Okay? So that this is the Shabaka stone. And in this stone, it tells a story. It tells a story of how the cosmic universe began. Now, what I've done here is I've taken not just the Shabaka stone, but the bottom part here is a very close look at the upper right-hand corner of the Shabaka stone, so that you can actually see what the characters look like. See, they don't want to give out too much, so you can't ask for the whole thing like this. So you can only ask for a little bit at a time. I plan on going to all of the 3 quadrants eventually, so I can put that all together again. But that's a whole other story down the line. In fact, I want this stone back. Tell you the truth, that's my ultimate goal: is get this back.
Get it back.
Because it's in the wrong hands for one thing, and also the people who handed it in, either they realize what this says and they're not giving it up, or they don't realize what it says. But either way, it should be in our hands anyway.
You say it's in the British Museum?
This is in the British Museum. This is item number 495. Okay, and so that this is a piece that is very important to us, and in this piece is part of what I do as part of the Per Ankh. I mean, we spend weeks on this. We spend weeks discussing the Shabaka stone, deciphering it, looking at it, understanding it. It's a very heavy piece. But because of the nature of the time it would take for me to elaborate too much, I want to go directly to the concepts of why you have to go before the beginning began. And that is because the essence of who we are as a people have always been around. At some anointed and appointed time, our mommies and daddies, our mother's egg, of all the millions of eggs that our mothers produced, and of all of the billions of spermatozoa that our fathers produced, there was a very unique egg and a unique spermatozoa that came together and created who we are as an individual in this room. That was a miraculous act to our ancestors. Why that particular egg and that particular spermatozoa? Because had it been another egg or another spermatozoa a month before or a month after, the people sitting in this room would not be sitting here. Although we would be sitting here, we would be a different people in the sense of what egg and what spermatozoa came together. So our ancestors believed that there was no such thing as an illegitimate child. The concept of being illegal said that the Creator made a mistake, and the Creator never made mistakes. So that the idea of a child, just because a piece of paper has not been produced that says fictitiously that a man and a woman have been brought together, and that makes the child legal, which is a law thing, that never existed within the African framework of thinking. Every child was an immaculate conception, because you were born of God. It was just the male that was the vehicle by which the impregnation took place. But the idea of there being one immaculate conception is a fictitious concept within the minds of a people that never understood the story when they were first told it by African folk in the first place. And so they always like to personalize things and make things one-of-a-kind kind of things. But every child, every one of us is a Christ. Every one of us is born of a virgin mother, having been touched by God to create this entity. It was the male vehicle who himself Our ancestors believed that each and every one of us was God having a human experience. That the idea of God being out here or God being it didn't exist. It's like when I was leaving the church one time and people were genuflecting and blessing themselves. I said, well, what you doing? They said, well, we're leaving the house of God. I said, but don't you understand? You are the house of God. So that if you leaving God in here, I'm not going outside. Because wherever God is, I want to be. So if you actually believe that as a human entity, you're leaving a building and you're leaving your God behind, that's a frightening concept. When you stop and think about it. Yet they'll call you heretical to believe that you are in fact God, and you are. You are a God having a human experience. And that one day when this physical fetter is gone, you're going to return back into the God, which is what the ancient Kamites were saying on this Shabaka stone. Because at the end of the story is joined back to the beginning of the story that they call the waters of Nun, or the source from whence all things become. And that is the concept of death. That upon death, death is not a finality. Death is merely a doorway. It is a stargate back into the essence from whence you came. So therefore, if that's true, where do we begin in our history is we begin before the beginning began. You can't begin on earth. And the reason why you can't begin on earth is because of the nature of what has been handed down to us as it relates to what we call the cosmic year. Now, thank you, brother. Cosmic year. Here you have concept of a cosmic year. Now, this may not be able to be seen too good, but Carl Sagan, an astronomer, he wrote a book and created a series that he called Cosmos. He has since passed away. He created a series that he called Cosmos. And in this he said that if at the Big Bang you were to start a calendar, and that if you were to track the 12 months, that every month represents 1 billion years since the Big Bang. So he basically is saying it's 12 billion years that our universe has been in existence, give or take. Now, of course, we can take this a whole lot of other areas, but in order for our human mind to be able to conceptualize this, let's go along with Carl Sagan for a while and say, well, okay, it is 12 billion years, and every month represents 1 billion years. What actually would happen is that you would find that the Earth, Geb, as our ancestors call it, didn't come to be until September 14th. So if that be true, you're talking about 8 and maybe close to a half billion years. So as an African people, where do we begin? You can't begin on Earth, because look at all this history that you missed. You were here somewhere. You were here somewhere. So the idea is to find ourselves at what our ancestors call Ptah. The first moment, the Big Bang.
Can we do a stop so I can...
And you know, fireworks explode, and out of the pieces that explode, others explode from that, and others explode from that, and others. So you have an ongoing thing, so that when you look at how the universe came into being according to the way our ancestors dropped it, is that there was an initial explosion that they called Atum. Atum. Atum was that seed, was what we will talk about tomorrow, the black hole. It was the initial, the first black hole to explode that came out of the waters of Nun. And out of the waters of Nun came Ptah. Ptah was the conversion of potential energy into kinetic energy. Now, we teach this in school. We teach this in astronomy. We teach kinetic energy, and we teach potential energy, and we teach waters and hydrogen. So all this is part of the curriculum. This is what I mean when I say we can actually do a curriculum out of this, because we teach this in school. It's just that the story that they give us is so abstract that the children do not see themselves as players in this. And that's the unfortunate thing, and that's what the problem with our astronomy books are, and our science books, is because they're so impersonal. But what could you expect? Dr. Clark would say to us, I'm surprised that you're surprised. How could a people who were not on the planet for millions of years get the original story when you were the ones that wrote it first? So why are we surprised that the books they produce our children reject? because they are not telling the story from a framework that our African minds can understand. Not to mention their own children don't understand the story. So that the problem is that this curriculum that we're talking about is taking what the children need. Our children need to understand this information. They need to understand chemistry, physics, astronomy, oceanography, all the things we teach them. They need to learn how to write. Look, we taught the world how to write. We taught the world how to read. So that all these things that they say we can't do in school, we must learn how to do it, but we have to do it through our own eyes. And that's our problem. That's our challenge. My 27 years in the Board of Education is we are studying someone else's history and culture through their means of understanding themselves, and quite frankly, they don't even understand themselves.
There you go.
So if they don't understand themselves, how could we ever think they could understand us? And so our challenge is to begin to look at this curriculum from our eyes and begin to develop things from our own eyes and begin to teach this. So that you're dealing with this first explosion coming out of the seed, which is atom, the word. That gives birth to superclusters. Superclusters explode and they create clusters. Clusters explode and they become galaxies. Galaxies explode and they become star formations. Star formations explode and they create what we today call the planets and asteroids and all these other things that we have within our system. If you can imagine again that initial fireworks that explodes and everything is constantly moving away from itself at the same time that it is exploding. This is the universe as it is explained by the major physicists and astrophysicists in the world today. Nothing they say is not written on the Shabaka stone. The Shabaka stone says the same thing, but they say it in the metaphor. And that's the key. We have to understand the metaphor. Asa Hilliard says that the metaphor is part and parcel of the very being of the African mind. It is what everything we do is based out of. And the metaphor, figurative language, is heavier than literal. Because the literal language, all you have to do is understand the literal. But the figurative, you have to not only understand the literal, but you have to understand the image that represents the literal. For instance, if I said, yo, that's bad, okay, you would have to not only understand that bad means good, you'd have to understand that when I say bad, it means good. So if I just said, oh, that's good, all you have to do is know one thing, what is good. But if I say that's bad, you got to know not only what is good, but the fact that when I say bad, it is very good. We speak in the metaphor constantly. We don't speak literally. We do, the undergirding of our consciousness is literal. But the way in which our flavor runs it is from all, and then comes the body language. Because you know, you could see someone across the street. You could just watch their body language. You may not know what they're saying, but you certainly can tell the tenor of what they're saying by their body language. Because black folk have this thing with the body, because the body speaks, not just the voice, because we are a people who can not only speak with our voices, but we have to add the body to give the flavor. What you might call metaphoric punctuation. Our body is our punctuation. It's our exclamatory marks and our question marks. You know, whoa, you know. And all the things that we do is like punctuation. So that's the way we speak. That's the way our ancestors spoke on the Shabaka stone. So that when we're starting to look at this and we're starting to develop this, here you have on September 14th, you have the development of the earth. The origin of life in the water, the assimilation of carbon in the oceans and ponds on the earth. And then you have the molecules that are ordering and arranging and rearranging with other molecules. This is what's happening on the earth as of September 26. This is written on the Shabaka stone. It is not written this way, but in the metaphor, this is what they're saying very clearly. And this is why it takes so long in the Quran to do the Shabaka stone, because there's so much that we have to talk about. It's a deep piece. This piece that I just showed you, this is an encyclopedia of all life and time. This places you in space and time. So this becomes a dynamic piece to have. This should be next to Dr. Martin Luther King picture in all our house. In October, you have a number of plants come to be in October. In the waters now, you're still in the water. Nothing's on the earth. There is no real earth yet, as so to speak. And then you have the multicellular beings coming out of that protoplasm, coming out of that chloroplast, coming out of that one entity that is in that water now. That begins to multiply in the waters. And that's what starts the multicellular life. Organic copulation. This is where you have the entities that are, for all intentions and purpose, androgynous now. They split apart. And now you have two opposites or complements. The same thing, but now they must mate with each other in order to bring forward that third piece. What Dr. Jeffries calls the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. Now you have this. And you see, this is what the Creator was really waiting for. Because this is what the Creator wanted. The concept of being able to create yourself in order to reflect on yourself and to know that you are God. Every holy book says this. That God could not know itself because of spirit. And so the spirit had to manifest itself, had to coagulate itself in order for it to be able to reflect back on itself and to know that it was God. We are the masterpieces of the cosmic universe. And the higher in consciousness we get, the more in control and the more in contact we do get with the higher forces around us. Now, to deal with December now, I had to get off the chain. Because there are so many things happening in December, we now have to create our own special month. This month of December now, because things are happening very quickly. Here now you have on December 1st, according to this cosmic map, starting the 12th billionth year, you have green life or photosynthesis. You have in science what is called the carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen chain starts to occur. And you start this replication of life, and you start all this happening in the waters. Okay, carbon. Carbon, as Dr. John G. Jackson tells us in Introduction to Africa, he says that carbon is the one atom that can unite with itself. Unlike hydrogen, you cannot put any more than 4 atoms together. Oxygen, no more than 4. Nitrogen, no more than 4. But once you introduce carbon, carbon can unite with itself. And that's what creates all of the millions upon billions of molecules that we have as carbon. The blackness of the universe. That dark energy that all science talks about. The dark matter. The melanin. That's cosmic melanin now. Coming into fruition. Coming into molecular existence. That's now beginning in the waters to create things. Here you have what's called the Precambrian age. As you look at geology and you look at the way in which they developed the history of the earth. And now you have on the 15th of December, you have the proliferation of life. In the waters, you're still in the waters now, you ain't come up on earth yet. You have what's called the tribolite, the squid-like creatures. Then you have multicolored cells now. Things are differentiating itself on our planet. But we're still in the waters. Now on the 19th, you have the age of the fishes. This is where the fish and the vertebrae, backbone, comes in. This is all part of life's history. This is all part of the Creator attempting to create itself in order to be able to know itself. The age of the fishes. Here now you have Ptah, or you have the hill coming up. John G. Jackson teaches us that there was a war on the earth, the war between land and water. And that land, through volcanic activity underneath the core of the earth, that a hill would rise, but water would come and take it back. And then the hill would rise, and then the water would take it back. He said this happened 5 or 6 times before. Once and for all, the hill came up and stayed up above the water. And that's when the sun now is coming down on the earth and starts the process of light and heat energy on this hill. At the tip of the hill is the continent of Africa. That's the top of the hill. That's why Africa is the first to be able to develop the kind of life. Because for millions of years, long before we as the entities we know ourselves to exist are on, the earth, the sun, all is preparing for us to come. See, this is why Dr. Sebi teaches us, be careful what you eat, because you should only eat what was on the earth by the time you got here. Right. Because the earth and the sun was getting the earth ready for us to come. So that when you eat all those huge tomatoes, be careful, because those are hothouse tomatoes. When you're eating all the foods that have been produced in the laboratory, be careful, because those foods were not there. But when you're eating things like romaine lettuce, or cherry and grape tomatoes, cucumbers. These were on the earth by the time we came to be. The fruits and the vegetables were on earth by the time we came to be. So there's nothing that we really have to produce. Now, at times where we had famine, land didn't grow, a lot of times we supplemented our diet with things that we created, which has its place. But once you get back into your nest and you get back into growing, then you no longer need to create these things that are not true to your digestive system. 22nd of December, you have winged insects, the amphibians. You have what is known as lungfish. Now, what is happening on the earth? What's happening on the earth is that war between water and land keeps happening, but there comes a point in time when the fishes now find themselves in a place where there is no water. So they must survive. We're talking about thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of years. We're not talking about overnight things where they're going to get to the water the next day. So that these entities, these fish now must start to use their fins as what would be considered to be legs. They have to use, their gills now begin to transform into being able to, the gills which you can breathe in water now, the gills now begin to construct themselves into what we call lungs. Primitive lungs, not the lungs that we know of. Because you have amphibians. Now, you know amphibians in war, the first troops to hit the shore is the amphibious. And the amphibious are the land and sea warriors. They come up off the water onto the beach, and then they become land warriors. So that amphibious comes from the concept that you are both land and water capable. However, some never really get a chance to get back into the water, so therefore they now mutate themselves, metamorphosize themselves into what we call the reptiles. And they become land dwelling. No longer water dwelling. They go back to water to drink, maybe to get a nice little swim. But basically they're now on the land. They're walking on the land. This is where trees come to be, reptiles come to be, and there's a geometric progression of life on the planet. The next day, what might be called Christmas Eve, or the 24th of December, comes the dinosaurs, who lived for 160 million years. The 25th of December, he cites the 26th of December, or the first day of Kwanzaa, as the age of the mammals. And this is where the reptiles who lay eggs on the outside begin to lay their eggs and keep them on the inside. And that is where the mammals come from. Not only that, but reptiles will feed their children from external ways. Mammals, the mothers feed the child themselves. So that you have the age of the mammals. On the 27th, birds fly, flowers bloom, and the dinosaurs perish. No longer dinosaurs. They say that the one examples of dinosaurs that we have on the planet today are the crocodiles. And that's why crocodiles were so sacred. Sobek was so sacred to the ancient Kemites, because of the nature of the reminder of what was here prior to human life. You have on the 30th of December, human ancestor living in Africa. The size increased considerably in terms of the brain. But I'd have to come back and do a whole thing on craniology and the brain to understand exactly what it is that's happening with the human brain and as this human is going through its process of becoming. But if there was one thing that I really wanted you to take away from this calendar, is when human consciousness was born. When Atum rose into the human mind, when the pineal gland, when the human ancestors, when what is called the frontal cortex, when this part of the brain came forward and gave seat to what we call the third ventricle, the pineal gland.
Dr. King calls that the eye of Heru also.
Yes, the eye of Heru, and he calls the third ventricle the vault of initiation. Because at this point, you see, up until this point, our human ancestor living in Africa had what was called an arrow forehead. In other words, it slanted back. And so therefore, the frontal lobe of our brain, it was very tight. When this forehead came forward, what happened was it opened up the room for what we call the ventricular system of the brain. See, this is what the curriculum is about. We teach this in school. We teach this in biology. We teach this about the brain. But as African people, we have to understand why we need to know this. Because this answers why we are such a spiritual people. Because it was our pineal gland that was the first to form. And for millions of years, well, first of all, there was only African people on the planet. But not only that, but we were developing our pineal gland. Our brains were perfecting themselves. This lateral, there are 4 ventricles in our brain. There's the lateral ventricle, which are like wings of a bird. There's the 3rd ventricle that joins these 2 lateral ventricles. And then the 4th ventricle comes down out of the 3rd ventricle. And that's where the cerebrospinal fluid, you have something known as choroids that produce what we call cerebrospinal fluid, which has 13 times the amount of melanin than your blood system. And it is the cause for all the free-flowing neurons. It's almost like thunder and lightning in your brain. It's like lights going off constantly. And the cerebrospinal fluid is that fluid that bathes your brain. And it's the cause of the free-flowing of your neurons. You have afferon and efferon neurons. Neurons, impulses that send out, impulses that you receive in. And according to the wealth, the purity of your cerebrospinal fluid is what demands how you think and the thoughts that you have. And therefore, you have these neurons that are made up of what we call axons and dendrites. And in between axons and dendrites, that's where your messages are sent through your brain. Axon hits dendrite, dendrite hits axon. In between that, you have what's called synapses. Synapses are openings. But inside of that, there are like what you might call escorts. An escort that will take an idea and escort it into the dendrite. It'll be shot through the dendrite, and there's an escort on the other side that will take it to the axon. And then there's another one on the axon that sends it to the dendrite. African people have a free-flowing ability to send ideas, and that's what makes us so creative. They can give us the very worst of things, and we can make it the very best of things. Example, soul food. That was all the garbage that they threw at us.
That's right.
And even though we may be aware of pork and chitlins now, during those days, we needed that. That's what helped us.
Fried chitlins.
Fried chitlins, all that stuff. But couldn't sister put some stuff on there? Hey, it made it a delicacy. People come from Japan and they're proud when they go back to Japan and say they ate at a soul food restaurant. In fact, they'll make sure that their tourist bus stops outside a soul food restaurant before they go back to Japan.
And learn how to cook it.
Learn how to cook it, that's right. That's exactly what they do. We take what, we have the Midas touch. We can take something that was thrown away and make it something not only that is capable of being dealt with, but we make it something even better than it was. And that's our history as a people.
Poke salad.
Yes, man. And you see, our thing is that we don't realize how great we are. We really don't understand this. And that's one of the great challenges that we have. We've allowed all that outside stuff to make us believe that we are less than. And these are the kinds of things that we have to bring to our children and to our communities. Not to make them feel that they're anything that they're not, because that would be worse than leaving them thinking inferior. To make them think that they're more, because Dr. King was right. It's the content of your character and not the complexion of your skin. So that will always hold true, but when you know your potential, you can become anything that you want to become. But all you have to do is know it, be conscious of it, to make it happen. So that human consciousness, what becomes important about this diagram is that the idea of burying our dead, the idea of painting pictures, the idea of building pyramids, the idea of creating foods, the idea of creating laws, the idea of creating God occurred. If you looked at this 12 billion year cycle, it occurred the last 10 seconds of the last minute of the last hour of this cosmic year. So the question becomes, where do we begin with our history? We just started thinking about ourselves 10 seconds at the end of this cosmic year. So the curriculum that we're dealing with has to take us back before the beginning began in order for us to even understand how we got to this point at all. So that our curriculum as an African people is a cosmic curriculum. We are a cosmic people. We are not earthlings, we're starlings. We are not stuff of the earth, although the earth encapsulates us. The reason why the earth encapsulates us is because if they should ever allow us beyond that concept, we would be with the stars. Our Bennu bird The phoenix would rise up out the ashes and people couldn't contain us. So to keep us on earth, nitrogen encompasses us.
Spacesuit.
Say again?
Spacesuit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's what it is.
And weights on our shoes to keep us,
Right.
gravity, keep us on the earth. Otherwise we fly.
They don't have it.
See, R. Kelly wasn't the first to say, I believe I can fly.
There you go. That's right.
We have to understand this as a people. So when the Dogon ancestors tell us that we came from outer space, we have to understand what they meant in the metaphor. Understand what we meant. Because the essence of our energy doesn't come from the earth, it comes from the sun. But the sun is a satellite for something even larger. And that is something larger, and it goes back to the point where you get back to the supercluster, and then you go back before the beginning began. And that's where we'll all end up when they take us down 6 feet. We're going to return back. It's like an ocean and a drop of water.
Back into dark night.
What part of the drop of water is not the ocean? And yet upon our birth, when we were conceived by our parents, that essence of the ocean was drawn away from the ocean, so we became a drop. And upon our transcendence, upon our moving on, that drop rejoins the major ocean. Our ancestors called it the universal Ka and the individual Ka. Ka being the spirit or the essence of all things. Things that you cannot destroy, things that you cannot create. And isn't that what science says energy is? It cannot be created, it cannot be destroyed. It is forever present. And it is that God that's having a human experience.
Measure it.
Please. And by the way, if you have any questions as we're going through, please feel free. Ask the question while we're doing it, because sometimes, it's better to get it while it's hot than to wait till the end, because sometimes it don't come out the same way at the end.
I was
Please.
listening to Dr. Remember Ani today,
Oh, yes.
and she said the Ka is African divinity, the Isili.
Yes, it is the Asali.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And it comes in many different. The Ka is exactly that. It's the essence of what we're all made from. It is what the ancestors returned back to. It is what Dr. King calls the collective unconscious. It's all of that collected. And all of it together is the creator. And our ancestors were well aware of that concept. And they lived their life in honor of that. And so that the way in which you proved your honor of your creator was not through your words, it was through your deeds. It was how you treated each other. That was the key. You could say what you want to about how much you believe in God. But if you're going to turn around and go to war with somebody and say, God told you, there's a problem there. A very big problem. And that's Dr. Clark used to always say, religion is the one thing that has created more wars
That's right.
over religion. Because I just want to know who the real God is. Because certain people say that their God said they could go to war. But who is the real God? Who is the real God? And if all God is one, then that seems like God is a little schizophrenic.
Yeah.
Because he's fighting with himself.
There you go.
And then the idea, of course, to think that God is just a man is a frightening concept also. Because my mind can't conceive of a God just a male. Particularly when I see everybody being created come from a woman. I have a problem with that
All
concept.
right. Come on.
So I see a combination of both male and female that creates this concept of regeneration and resurrection of the human family. So yes, Dr. Marimba Ani, most definitely. In fact, I have a tape with me that deals with King Tut and that the ventricles that I used to visit when Sister Marimba Ani used to teach at Hunter. I used to be one of the visiting teachers that used to go to her class to teach. She used to always invite me to teach her class every year. And she since, I believe, lives in Atlanta now. Or thereabout, I'm not quite sure. You were listening to her on the radio today?
No, on I saw a DVD I had.
Oh, or DVD?
About, African women something.
Okay.
African women wisdom.
Okay. Yeah, I believe she's in Atlanta now. But she was at Hunter in New York for many, many years. Good sister, please.
I had a question. When you had the chart up and you were speaking about the amphibians coming
Yes.
up on the land,
Yes.
I always had this question about what is the fascination that Europeans have with whales when they beach themselves up and
Yes.
they lose their mind. And I was trying to, what is it? Is it their history with the whales? you know, when you go back millions of years, could that be a descendant, or I'm just trying to correlate that with the amphibians coming up on the land.
It's interesting, I'm not quite sure. Not quite sure, but there is one thing while we're talking about whales and dolphins. You know, the idea is that, you know, in fact, coming by plane, you know, here, you know, of course, now we know that Africans had airplanes. If you look at the book Blacks in Science, they will show you that.
Helicopters.
Helicopters too. In fact, the Technology of the Gods, there's a book called Technology of the Gods that shows helicopters and submarines, by the way. And that all, you know, all this is not far-fetched when you understand history. It's only far-fetched when you believe that everything started happening post 1492.
Under the sun.
And then you lose sight of the realities of how long trade and movement on this planet has occurred. It's happened far longer, but because of white supremacy, Dr. Neely Fuller teaches us. In fact, you can't understand any of this as Dr. Neely Fuller teaches us in his compensation codes. You can't understand any of this if you don't, and Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, if you don't understand white supremacy and genetic annihilation. If you don't understand these two things, you'll never understand the true picture of what actually is going on and why we find ourselves in the position that we're in. But I do know that when they were attempting to resurrect the study of airplanes, you know, where did they study? Well, they studied dolphins. That's how they were able to perfect flight. Because certainly a bird, they couldn't have used a bird because the bird don't look like a plane. A bird don't have that thing that comes up at the end. But if you look at an airplane and you look at a dolphin, they both look alike. And when you fly, look at the sides of the wings and look at when they're going up and when they're coming down and everything they do. If you look at a dolphin, that's exactly what the dolphin does when it's moving through water waves. And there's no difference between water waves and air waves, as above, so below.
Right.
So to perfect the airplane, they studied what dolphins do in the water. And that's why dolphins are so brilliant. Because dolphins, of course, they themselves, you know, being the mammals of the water, very, very powerful entities. But why they have a fascination, I think Europeans have a fascination with anything they don't understand. And that's a frightening thing because they don't understand most things. What's even most frightening is they think they know everything. What's even more frightening is we follow them. That's a frightening thing. You know, have you ever walked off a precipice with somebody who didn't know where they were going? Well, that's what we're doing. Our planet is being destroyed.
That's right.
Oil, I can walk.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about oil. I'm worried about water.
That's the main.
Water is what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and
I'm worried about clean water.
oils and everything.
Oh, yeah. Oil is nothing compared to water. So these are things that we should and really do need to think about. In terms of coming from this concept and going into today's presentation, what I just wanted to do was to show you some overheads. And also, I just wanted to make sure that time-wise, I'm within the scope. I have 5:46. How does it look in terms of the presentation? Is there a particular time that people wanted me to just move through this? Is there any time limit?
I think
Oh, no,
everybody
be careful.
can.
Oh, no,
Go
don't
for
tell
it.
me that, because I've gone
Go
hours.
for it.
First thing that I'd like to show you
Anxious to know.
is the Peters projection map. Peters projection map becomes very important in terms of looking at the world. The Peters projection map was created by a man by the name of Arnold Peters. We still use the Mercator map. The Mercator map was created before they knew Australia existed. It's basically a mercantile map. It's produced by mathematical calculations. Arnold Peters, having been commissioned by the UN and other worldwide forces, began to look at the pictures taken back from outer space by the ships going. And what he came to realize is that this actually is what the Earth really looks like. This is what Africa really does look like. Africa is much larger than what is possessed to be in the Mercator map. South America, much larger. Australia, much larger. India, much larger. Greenland, much smaller. Europe,
They're gonna do it.
much smaller.
Yeah. See.
Much smaller. This is what the Earth actually looks like from pictures. This is what it looks like by ancient like 1500s, 1600s, 1700s when the Mercator map was produced. But this is the Peters projection map. And what is interesting about this concept is that this is how we teach our children untruths, and yet we teach them that no matter what. Because in geography class, you are taught that a continent is a large landmass surrounded by water. And then we ask our children the 7 continents. And we say that Europe is a continent, and it's not. What is Europe, by the way?
Connected to Asia.
Yes, it is, but what do we call it? In geographic terms, what do we call what Europe actually is? It's a peninsula. It's a large landmass surrounded on 3 sides by water. Europe is not a continent, it's a peninsula. Why do we call it a continent? Because Europeans wrote the book. And they call themselves what they want to call themselves.
That's right. There you go.
And to make themselves feel like they're equal to all other things, actually, Europe is the tail to the Asian kite.
There you go.
And also Asia, a lot of Asia is actually ice. So Africa really is the largest landmass. Because if there was a heat wave, Asia would shrink real quick. Because a lot of it in the northern climes is not really land. It's really ice.
Going back under.
So that Africa is the most, and tell me this, look, I can't speak for Washington D.C., but they cannot even get the census right in the Bronx. So you mean to tell me you counted the Africans in the Ituri Forest in Central Africa? You gonna tell me how many people are in Africa? You don't even get the census right in your own backyard.
How about that?
How you gonna tell me how many people are in the Ituri Forest of Congo?
Can't do it.
Yet this is what they'll have you believe. Why? Because there is strength in numbers per se. So therefore, if they say you minority, you think minority. Where in reality, that could not be.
That's in the Middle East.
Yes, the Middle East is another concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing. And see, here's another geographic thing.
Middle
Where's
East.
the
Middle East.
Egypt
Now,
is in the Middle East.
yeah,
Middle East. Where's the Middle East?
yeah. Libya is in the Middle East. Okay. Now, in geography class, you teach that east and west runs north and south. So if it's in the east, it's east whether it's north or whether it's south. So that if Libya is in the Middle East, so is Europe. So is Azania. Because east-west travels north-south in geographic terms. So Middle East becomes a political term and not a geographic term. However, it is used geographically. So therefore the illusion becomes geography, as opposed to what it really is, which is a political illusion. So if you call it Middle East enough, even if something is an illusion, it becomes someone else's reality if they believe the illusion and start acting. Dr. Wade Nobles from California says that power is the ability to define someone's reality and have that person accept that definition as if it were their own.
There you go.
And we are living someone else's definition of who we are and what the world is.
There you go.
And we have embraced it. And therefore, it actually is a reality.
Run away with it.
You know? So, Mercator map, I wanted to show you the map itself by itself, basically what the world looks like. And then begin to show you, take Africa out, and show you Africa. Now, the reason why this becomes important to me is because these countries, all these, a little over 55, they're all an illusion. These were created in 1885 at the Berlin Conference, and then a year later at the Belgian Conference. And this became very important to me in 1985. In fact, my time in Washington was spent in the Library of Congress because I was doing a research paper on William Leo Hansberry of Howard University, who started the first African Studies program in an accredited university. And the reason why I say that is because going back to the days of Martin Delaney and others, there have always been workshops and conferences and educational attempts at teaching us who we are. But in an accredited university is what I'm speaking of. And at Howard University in 1922, William Leo Hansberry started the first African studies program anywhere in the world. William Leo Hansberry. And in 1985, 84, I came to D.C. I lived in D.C. 1977, 1978. I had a cousin that lived in Silver Springs, and then she moved to Van Buren, up the block. And I stayed with her while I was here. In 1985, I returned to D.C. to do some research on William Leo Hansberry because I was going for my degrees. And it was here that I interviewed Chancellor Williams when he was still with us. I visited him right down in that senior home where he lived for a couple years. I went to visit him and had a nice couple days with him. And this was 1985. I visited William Leo Hansberry's daughters and looked at his work. I visited Charles Wesley, who was the dean of the Social Studies Department that hired Hansberry in 1922. He was 93 years old when I interviewed him. A wealth of information. He wrote a powerful book on Richard Allen, the African Methodist Episcopal, and a number of other things that he had developed. Richard Allen. In 1985 was the centennial of the Berlin Conference, because the Berlin Conference was in 1885. And Dr. Clark had asked me to do research in the Library of Congress and to find out what role the United States played in the Berlin Conference, because really the Berlin Conference was a European conference. But Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben wrote a little pamphlet, not a little pamphlet, it was a regular 8.5 by 11, but it was a pamphlet on the centennial of the Berlin Conference. And so while I was in DC, I went to the Library of Congress and I did a research for Dr. Clark. Come to find out the United States did. The United States were diplomats without portfolio, which means that they were undercover. They were there. They got some of the fruits, but it was Europe that carved Africa up. England, France, Germany. Year later, Belgium got Congo. This is all an illusion. So as an African people, it becomes extremely dangerous for us to think in terms of people being Sudanese, or being Somalian, or being Kenyan, because all that doesn't exist. Our ancestors, when they created their nations, they used natural boundaries. They did not use political or economic boundaries. Africa is carved up this way for economic and political reasons amongst European powers. When you go to Kenya and Ethiopia, the northern part of Kenya and the southern part of Ethiopia belong to a people known as the Konso people, K-O-N-S-O, same people. When you go to Sierra Leone and Liberia in West Africa, you have a people known as the Vai, V-A-I. Yet today, some of them are called Liberians and others are called Sierra Leoneans. In Kenya and Ethiopia, some of the Konso people, some are called Ethiopians and some are called Kenyans. But they're the same people because their boundaries were natural boundaries that created nations within these kind of natural boundaries, whether they be rivers or mountain ranges or whatever it was. So that in looking at Africa today, this is not the way Africa is. These are not the people who we know to be African people. So again, it's an illusion as to who is a Kenyan, who is an Ethiopian, who is a Sierra Leonean, who is a Cote d'Ivoirian. Because it's all about France and England. It's what we call fear. False evidence that appears real. Fear. False evidence that appears real. It's an illusion that we're living under. And for as long as we have these illusions, they are our realities. And when we get into discussions and arguments, debates with people, funny thing that they do, and one of the things that that happen, you know, they don't really invite me to panel discussions anymore. They don't invite me because basically I understand the psychology of what it is. First of all, I go into all like panels and other things that I've been in, whether it be televised or whether they be just in the open. I walk into it knowing that there are traps in there. I'm not going in there to talk about anything because I know they're already trying to trap me. When I walk in, I've been invited because they want to trap me.
Yes.
We're not having no real conversation. They say, okay, let's open up this discussion. No, you're not opening up. You're opening up the pit for me to fall in.
Yes.
And so, what they will do is this. This is the psychology that they do that I've come to realize, is that they will ask somebody else to define what it is that they're talking about. And then they'll say to me, what do you think about that comment? If I answer that, it's over. Because that's going to be the center of the entire discussion for the rest of the day. So what do you say? He has every right to his opinion, or she.
Right.
But let me tell you how I see it. Because when that happens now, you have two camps. You don't have one camp commenting on the other camp. You can never get involved with them, because that's what they're looking for. And once you get involved, every question is going to be drawn from your response to that. Yet if you offer your definition, you've stopped the discussion automatically. And once you get aware of that, and see, normally what they do is that they get very offensive towards you. They get very emotional. And the reason why they get emotional is because once they draw you into the emotional pit, you can never again be scientific. And once you start dropping science on them, then the discussion's over because they haven't anything to stand on. They used to invite me to this science fair until I introduced the Shabaka Stone, Hall of Science. And their problem is that I started throwing primary sources at them, and they had an astronaut there. And at the end, when they brought us all together to discuss this, they began to talk about, the Renaissance and all this. And I said, the Renaissance never occurred. And they said, the Renaissance, but there's evidence. I said, no, it wasn't a Renaissance. It was nothing but the Moors teaching Europe. And so, how can you have a Renaissance, which is a rebirth, when you never had a birth in the first place? To be reborn, you got to be born. So that was the first birth right there. But when the first birth was when the Greeks sat at the Ethiopians' feet, the Nubians' feet. That was the first birth. And then they had the Dark Ages, which came upon them. The Dark Ages was when the Roman Empire fell, and the African world did not come to their defense until 710, when the Moors came in through Tariq. And then 711, you have the formation in the southern end of Spain, you have the formation of the Moorish Empire coming in, throwing out the Visigoths and the Vandals, throwing them out. And then you have the establishment of universities, and you have the establishment of libraries, you have the establishment of soap. Because that's the first thing that the Africans brought in, soap. See, I can't even survive here if y'all don't clean up. And then they brought in something that is known as alcohol. They say, because after you wash your funky self, now you got to disinfect you. And alcohol is alcohol. Disinfect you because you're sick. And then after that, they started to bring in the strawberries and the Valencia oranges. Started bringing hot and cold running water. They started to bring in sidewalks. You have places like in Cordova that had raised sidewalks for 10 miles, lit by lamps. That wouldn't hit Europe for another 500 years. And that's what Africans brought in. They brought in music. They brought in the African harp, turned it sideways, encased it in wood, and created the piano. Because that's what the baby grand is. It's a harp turned sideways. They started the first music conservatory in Valencia, Spain, 790. There's a brother named Ziriab, Blackbird, that brought in the lute. That began the whole concept of quarterphones, playing guitar. Africans brought that in. Africans brought in the code of law. But there was something else that the Africans brought in. They brought in slavery.
Yeah, we did.
And let me tell you how they did it. Africans didn't have slavery. Africans had organized servitude. And what the Europeans had was disorganized slavery. When Africans that had organized servitude, because the key, when you hear people arguing about Africans started slavery, had slaves, there's a problem, there's a fundamental problem, because even though you may have been in the service of another person, you were always a human being. The children born to you were born free. What Europeans did is that they created what was called by Kenneth Stamp a peculiar institution. That they superimposed organized servitude over disorganized enslavement. And that's what brought forward the peculiar institution. Africans didn't have slavery. There may have been times when those that so-called were in control of the person that they had maybe just mistreated them. There's good and bad in all things. So we don't have this, this pie in the sky concept. They were good and bad, but we did not have the concept of human beings not being human, because that went against every belief system of the African peoples. So therefore, we did not have slavery. We had servitude. But once introduced to Europeans, in their minds, they created a legal system. Africans never had a legal system. In many ways, in many parts of Africa, servitude was like the drug trade. It may have happened, but it was illegal. And if they caught you, you're in trouble. And so these are the concepts that we should understand when we talk about what happened in Africa and what has happened to us as a people as we sit today. Because as we go back in our history, we have a brother, in fact, here in Washington, D.C., wonderful brother, by the name of Anthony Browder. Okay? And I know he's been here. And I know his books are here. All right? Wonderful brother.
Weeks ago.
Beautiful daughter, too. Okay? Who wrote a book. Many books. But this one is Nile Valley Contributions. And in this, I use this because he turns the map upside down. And he shows a southern orientation of what the world is. Because what we're looking at really is a north to south concept of the world. What he does in this picture right here is that he turns it the other way around. As Africans look at the world. Africans don't look at the world the other way. Africans look at the world this way. Africans don't look at the world in a sense that it's at top. When they look at, in terms of the happy flows from south to north. So they go down north, up south. Because going up basically means you're going against the flow of the river. But because we're so Mississippi and so northern bound in our river system's origins, we look at the world from north to south. Anthony Browder turned it around so that we have an African version. This way, Europe's in the south and Africa is in the north, if you want to look at it that way. Because when you're in outer space and you look at the earth, what really is up and down? According to where you're standing, what's up and what's down.
That's right.
But it's your orientation and your perspective that determines how you look at the world. And we're looking at the world through European eyes. So I wanted to include this just to look at what our brother Anthony Browder did in his book, Nile Valley Contributions, and to turn this map upside down. Let's go to the origins of where we see life in Africa. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. We have in this area a concept of two lakes that are very important. Two mountain ranges, very important, that are called Mountains of the Moon. You have Kilimanjaro and you have Rwenzori. Rwenzori in Uganda and Kilimanjaro in Tanzania both mean Mountains of the Moon, to which the Khamites in the Hunefa Papyrus and in the Turin Papyrus both claim that we originated at the foothills of the Mountains of the Moon. I don't know where we stand as it applies to our very related family members known as apes and gorillas, and I notice some of us do not necessarily claim a relationship with them.
No Darwin theory.
But I really find no problem in relating to them because when you get to this part of the world, there is a mountain range where you'll only find gorillas. That's where the gorillas come from. In places that are today near Rwanda, Congo, and Uganda. And in this mountain range that you have in this area here, the Rwenzori Mountains right here, that's the only place that you're going to find gorillas on the planet. And they find themselves in the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains. And there was a group of them, apes that went up the mountain, and they are known as the silverback
Yeah.
or the mountain gorilla. And then you have the ones that fanned out west, fanned out east, that are called the eastern lowland and the western lowland gorillas. The only place on the planet that you'll ever find gorillas are in the Rwenzori Mountains. Every place that you see apes outside of this mountain system, they've been brought from the Rwenzori Mountains there. The same way when you see lions, the only place that you'll ever see lions is in Kenya and Tanzania. Lions are indigenous. That's how we know that the Meduneter was created by inter-Africans, because how can you have the letter L with the representation of a lion when you never had lions? The lions moved up happy. Lions are not indigenous to Egypt. They're not indigenous to Kemet. They're indigenous to Kenya and to Tanzania. That's where they originate from. So that the reason why I say this is because when you deal with life history, I've learned to say life history as opposed to evolution, because evolution bothers certain people. I don't deal with Charles Darwin, because Charles Darwin died denying that he ever said it. And I do not believe that humans and apes, that humans came from apes. I don't believe that. I don't believe that, but I do believe we have a common ancestor. And I believe that one of our ancestors, at one point, the original ancestor was in a tree, was in a boreal life. And either they saw something on the ground they wanted, or they fell out the tree or something, but they began to continue their life on the planet, walking on the earth, while the other branch remained up in the trees. This is what I view. Because bone for bone, muscle for muscle, 99.9% of what we look like morphologically, our body, is exactly what a gorilla looks like. There is no difference between the two. It's three things that we have that gorillas don't have, and they're working on them. Language, intellect, and reasoning. That's what we have. Now, again, there's a lot of work has to be done here. Nothing's written in stone. I don't claim to be absolutely correct, and I ask you, please don't believe a word I say. Because I'm not here to convince you or to persuade you. I'm just here to get you out the box. And to help us start to think outside the box, because we're too much in the box, and we're allowing people to define for us concepts. Because the last time I was in the zoo, I was talking to a gorilla. And gorilla said, well, what make you think that you that great that I want to identify with you? You walk around, you don't even know what to eat. I've been vegetarian all my life. When the last time you had a Big Mac? If you throw a Big Mac in a gorilla cage, he'd take the lettuce out and throw everything back at you. Because he don't eat meat. Don't eat bread. Only eat fruits and vegetables and a couple ants and roaches here and there. But basically, don't eat any of that. So that I don't have a problem identifying with what I perceive to be a reality that is so close to me. 99.9%, and I mean, I have charts of apes and I have charts of humans, and the only thing is the formation of the human mind that's different, the formation of the brain. And if you look at an ape, she still has that slanted forehead, which is that pineal gland that has not been able to take root to be able to flow that cerebrospinal fluid. When our ancestor came out of the tree and started to walk on the earth, the opposable thumb and the ape's opposable big toe gives them 100% mobility. But when we began to walk on the planet, we started stepping on that big toe. It started getting in our way, so we kept pushing it aside so that we wouldn't step on it. And the way nature and biology has it, they start your children's for thousands of years being born with what you needed to do in the first place, so that instead of always being born and have to do this, pretty soon it started to be born here, and then pretty soon our 5 toes line up all together. When that happened and we began to live a comfortable life on the planet, then we lost 50% mobility. In other words, we couldn't use our feet to be mobile. But in doing that, in losing 50% mobility, we gained 50% stability, which freed up our hands. This is where the reason and the intellect come in. Because when our hands were freed up, we began to use our hands to do things that began to aid us and to do things. And when that happened, it forced our brain to think. When our brains started to think, it allowed our hands to do things. So the circuitous movement of consciousness began to rotate, and pretty soon we started doing some basically fundamental things. The human family has moved through 6 families according to Sheikh Anta Diop. When we look at civilizational barbarism, he talks in the first part about the origins of humanity. I mean, the brother was just, he was Imhotep. Paul Robeson and Diop I put in the same category. Multi-geniuses. This brother was a mathematician, linguist, archaeologist, anthropologist. I mean, this brother had it all. Absolutely. Race and history, origin of humanity, and racial differentiation. And it's in this book that he talks about the 6 forms of humans. Australopithecus robustus. That's the first concept that came out of this family of human beings that was walking on the planet. Robust meaning robust, heavy boned, large boned. Australopithecus meaning southern. Australopithecus robustus was this large, heavy individual that carried this great weight. But as this individual began to think and began to live its life, it began to do things that allowed it to kind of loosen up on the bone structure and the morphology. And Australopithecus robustus became Australopithecus gracile, the second form. The whole time this is happening, the brain is changing fundamentally. And the cerebral cortex, this frontal lobe now, is beginning to come forward because the brain is thinking. And have you ever thought so hard you get a headache? Well, what's actually happening when you're thinking like that is that you're actually shooting that cerebrospinal fluid. That blood is going through your system. And what is your brain is actually throbbing. You know when you lift weights, this happens? Well, when you think, the same thing happens with your brain. And what begins to happen is that what we notice about the human being is that it's not the size of your brain that makes you more intelligent. It's the depth of the nooks and the crannies in your brain that makes you who you are and how you think. Because as you think, your brain is throbbing. And as it's throbbing, those nooks and crannies start to create deeper crevices and deeper crevices. And it's like a newspaper. If you took a newspaper like the New York Times or the Washington Post and you turned this drum upside down and you tried to put it in, it wouldn't fit. But if you crumpled up that paper and really compressed it, it would fit. Well, that's what happened to the brain. As we began to think, we began to create concepts. And again, the per Ankh allows us to really flesh these concepts out, because what I'm about to tell you really is at least 3 classes. But I'm going to condense it so you can at least understand a general concept of what I mean by consciousness. When this first early human began to experience its environment, and when it began to reflect back on itself, the intellect and the reasoning began to occur. What it began to collect is what we call in psychology percepts. Percepts are images. Images. Images come out of your senses, okay? So that you have sense perceptions. After you get enough of these sense perceptions, sensory vibrations, you then begin to group them. And the way I teach children, I use money. We understand things when we use money, particularly children, they understand money. And I use pennies. And if you put enough pennies in your pocket, pretty soon too many pennies. So what you do is you convert 5 pennies into 1 nickel. So now you only have to collect, now you only have to carry 1 coin. Well, the concept of carrying perceptions, sense perceptions, leads to recepts. Recepts are the images that you relate back to the sense. So when you smell something, you see something, you taste something, you see something, you hear something, you touch something, those are all your first introductions. And this is why when you look at children, a child will try to put it in their mouth, put it in their ear, look at it, bang it on their head. So they use all 5 senses to try to figure out what this is, looking at it. And then pretty soon, those 5 percepts, you'll have it right over there and they'll go right to it. And what it is that it's a ball. They know what it looks like. They know what it smells like. They know what it tastes like. They know what it sounds like. So that those 5 senses becomes an image. So now that infant is looking at that and always knows what that is. So now what was once 5 senses becomes one image. Now, this is what the early human family is doing in their minds as that brain is throbbing. And although we are so far advanced now that we are on another level, back then it was wondrous inventions for them. Just like for a baby infant, it's a wondrous invention. But wow, when you see the face of a baby when they finally figure something out. And then what happens is that out of the percepts, you start to collect all of these recepts. So now not only do you see a ball, but now you see a drum and you see a table. You see an Olmec head. You see a lot of other things. So now you're collecting all these pennies. But now you're converting all these pennies, these senses, into images so that your mind can deal with all these things at one time. Because otherwise, if you had 100 pennies, that'd be a lot of stuff to carry around. But 20 nickels is not as bad. But now if you convert those nickels into dimes, it's like that one step further. So now you have what's called concepts. Concept is when you take a word and you apply it to that. Now you don't even need to see it anymore. You don't need to sense it anymore. You just know what a ball is. That is a concept. That is when language now, and that's what's separated. Because every animal in the world can do those first things that I told you. They can sense things and they can image things, but they don't have a word to call it. Humans differentiated itself because now it has a word to call it. That's the concept. That's when you convert the nickels into dimes. But every dime is worth 2 nickels, and every 2 nickels is worth 5 pennies or 10 pennies. So that you don't lose that original concept, or I shouldn't use that word. You don't lose that first percept, because what made the recept is the percept. What made the concept was the recept that made the percept. So that we're still carrying around all those pennies. We've just now condensed them into smaller things that allow our brain to have more things. So instead of trying to call back all these percepts, we just call it out, and that's the name. Please, brother. That's exactly what they mean by that. Exactly. And in many ways, my brother, we are not just a word people, but we're a picture people. And again, going back to the time that I have, there's so much that I can cover with you. I start here because this is where we can start to just give you a general concept, because you know, this is just the beginning of an eternal relationship between myself and Washington, D.C.
All right, okay.
This is just the beginning. And I look forward to making this come, and even if we might think in terms of a per onc here in Washington, D.C., to begin this concept of the curriculum development so that we all can go back to our respective communities and wherever we are, schools, whatever you do, and just bring this information back to start to flesh out this curriculum. We are a traveling think tank. So that this idea of a picture of 1,000 words, I would introduce something that a gentleman from Harvard University, another European American by the name of Howard Gardner, came up with multiple intelligences. And while I respect him and admire him, he didn't invent nothing new. In fact, African folk been teaching this way for millions of years. But sometimes when other people say things, it has more validity than when we say it. There's another gentleman by the name of Benjamin Bloom who came up with something known as Bloom's taxonomy. Taxonomy means to categorize things. That's nothing new. African people been using categories of education. The Dogon themselves have the Jiri So, the Beni So, the Bolo So, and the So Dai, which is the same exact thing as what all these educators are now saying. So it's nothing new. But you see, we as a people, we can see something and we can start talking about it, and people say, well, where do you see that? That's why you got to be careful when you're around certain people not of your own culture. Because the worst thing you could say when you're out of your culture is, did you hear that? Don't ever say that. Because your melanin in your vestibular cochlea picks up things that theirs doesn't.
Right, exactly.
And when you say, did you see that? No, don't tell them that. Your eyes perceive things. And pretty soon they start saying you crazy. It's not that you crazy. It's that their melanin is so dead that they don't pick up. It's like a radio. You can have a radio now. You have satellite radio, pick up thousands of radio stations. You can have that little radio station that only picks up 3, and you're lucky if you can get 2. So there are some of us who pick up many different levels And sometimes we can pick them all up at one time. I remember when I was living in Washington, and it's funny that I'm in Washington telling this story, because I always tell the story everywhere I go. I was in a Hardy, Hardee, a restaurant, Hardy. See, we don't have Hardee's in New York. And I was sitting in Hardee's one day. This was back in the day. This was a long time ago. This was my meat eating days, so I know this was a long time ago. No, they don't? No. Hardy. Well, I remember I was sitting there, and I was eating, and I heard a man talking. It was a brother, elder brother, and he was in the booth across from me. And he was looking just above my head, and he was talking. And he must have sensed me looking at him, because he gazed his eyes down at me and he said, I know you think I'm crazy, but there is somebody just above your head that I'm talking to. And I looked up. I didn't see nobody. But you know something? I honestly believe that brother did see somebody. And there's no reason why, and because he had such a cogent conversation, and such a real who am I to say what he actually did see? I don't know. Now, some people might say he's crazy. I just looked at him and I just hope that whoever was above me didn't fall on me. But just keep your conversation and keep it nice, because I don't want that guy to come over across the thing. Please, Brother Tahuti.
They would like to know if
Yes.
Whatever it was above you.
Exactly.
Well, that was just to hire you.
Exactly.
That's what it was.
And I see my perception of what he was, and I've told this story many places I've gone, wherever I've gone, I've told this story when I'm dealing with this subject about perceptions. Because so many things come at us in ways that may not be indigenous to what we're experiencing at that moment, but is very real to somebody else. And when you start getting into us as a people, you start realizing that all around us there are entities that come to us in various forms that we either see, sometimes we hear, sometimes we close our eyes and we talk to these entities. They are our ancestors. They are collective voices. And why should they not be with us when you think of what the reality really is cosmically? So that the perception, percept, recept, concept, then leads you to this final aspect, which really now is intuitive instinct. See, when we were part of the animal world, some people say lower form. I don't like to use that concept, but let's just say before we became who we were, we had what's called instinct. We followed a natural pattern of things, where we did what we did because nature told us. We then received the power of negation. Power of negation was what we call free will. We had the power to tell nature no. That's bad, but that's good if you know what to do with that. Because on a human level, what is animal instinct becomes human intuition. Example, down in North Carolina, you're ready to walk out the door. Grandmother's sitting in the chair. She said, baby, don't take that bus today. It's called mother wit. Intuition, you pick something up. There's something that you pick up. You can't put your finger on it. You can't say what it is. It's just a wit that says, don't take, you didn't say it yesterday, and you're not going to say it tomorrow. But today, baby, don't take that bus. Mother wit. That's what we call intuitive instinct or instinctive intuition. That's what happens when your percepts perfect into recepts, perfect into concepts, perfect into that next level. And that's when you convert 4 quarters into paper money, and you can carry all sorts of monies with you. And that's what happened in the human mind. That's what happened to our early ancestors that did not happen to those that remained in the tree. Those that came down began to think on other levels, and what happened was Australopithecus robustus became Australopithecus gracile. But gracile was so powerful that it ate watermelon and spit the seed out. And then it looked and it saw, after months, it started to see other watermelons coming up. It said, wow. Spit. Now it knew the watermelon was coming up. Wow. But then it noticed that, I noticed that the earth engulfs that seed and brings it down. And then the watermelon patch comes up. But what would happen if I should dig a hole and put the seed in? Then I'm going to skip that time it takes for the earth to pull it down. I'm going to try that. Sticks his finger, and then puts the seed in. All of a sudden it notices, wow, the watermelon patch came much sooner than the other one. He said, but wait a minute, you know, my finger hurt. I'm walking around putting hundreds of these holes in. So suppose I took a stick,
Yeah.
put it in the ground, put the seed, and I could put it in deeper, and the watermelon patch would come sooner, and then my finger wouldn't hurt. Homo habilis, human of ability, began tool making. See, this is what the free hand did. Then I said, but wait a minute. Suppose I take 3 sticks, put them together. I could put 3 seeds in there. What happens if I take 3 sticks and I drag it on the ground and just throw seeds? What happens if I hook that stick to an animal and let the animal do all the work? That's the domestication of animals. And so now you see this human of ability, this Homo habilis now begins to eat better. When it eats better, it thinks better. When it thinks better, it eats better. And this concept of eating better and thinking better now leads up to our women beginning to count. Contrary to previous announcement, math and science was born in the woman's mind. Women invented math and science. And why would women invent math and science? Well, let me ask us. What reason naturally does a man have to count? What happens to us naturally that we would have to count? Nothing. What happens to a woman that would make her count? Her cycle of life. And so in this experience of the cycle of life, it made the sister have to start to count, to prepare for her cycle. In her cycle of life, she came to realize that there were 4 different concepts in that. There was a point when she was moving towards the creation of the egg. There was a point where the egg came to be, and there was a point when the egg began to leave and go to the fallopian tube and leave her body. It was 4. Sister looked up in the sky and noticed that there was a celestial body that went through the same kind of cycle. 28, 29, 30-day cycle. And she also realized that it goes through 4 cycles: the waning, the waxing, the full, and the new moon. And the moon became the concept of the egg that she was producing in her body. So when she looked up in the sky, from math, from numerology, she then created astronomy. Numerology is to math, astronomy is to science, as the second is to the day. It is the smallest concept that allows us to build the larger entity. Math is built on numerology. Science is built on astronomy. Just look at the word, astronomy. Ast is the feminine principle, Ra is light and heat energy, and nomi is the study of. So astronomy is the study of the feminine principle of light and heat energy, which comes out to cosmic reality. And so our sisters pass this legacy on from mother to daughter for millions of years. And sisters, I do appreciate you somewhere along the line allowing one of us brothers to sit in front of you, because that's how we learn math and science. Now, brothers get real tight, Jordan, this way. Brothers say to me, hey, you know, I was with you when you were talking that African thing, but now you into this man-woman thing. But brothers, we were doing great things too. We were the complements to our women. So while our sisters were doing what they did best, we were doing what we did best, and together we made the society function that would later build the pyramids that would become the foundations of the study of the sky and the earth. Because the pyramids are astronomical observatories which chart the seasons that allow us to grow. Because growth and eating is the cornerstone to life. And we're going to wrap this section up by just me asking you a question. What is power? Power is the ability for you to be able to answer this question. If they were to close all of your food stores, all of the places where you get your food, for me it would be the Stop and Shops and the Sea Towns and the Pathmarks where I get my food. If they closed down all Pathmarks, Sea Towns, Stop and Shops, Piggly Wigglies, if they closed all them down, my question to you is this: when you think of power, would you be able to eat? If you can say no, you don't have no power. But if you tell me you got a little garden in the backyard that you live, and if they closed the shops, you could grow your cucumbers and your tomatoes and your little bit of stuff, and you could eat, you got power. Because when you get all down to it, Native Americans often say, how long will it take before Europeans realize you can't eat no dollars? If you can eat, you got power.
I can eat some greens right now because I cover my collards up.
Okay, I hear you. All right. Okay, we're gonna close up this portion of it. Brothers and sisters,